Teresa Lawson was a 46-year-old school librarian who worked at Franklin Middle School in Franklin, Tennessee. She had held this position for 15 years, and during this time, she had earned a reputation as a dedicated professional. Colleagues and students described her as a kind and responsive person, always ready to help find the right book or information at school. Teresa organized various events aimed at increasing interest in reading among students. She regularly held book fairs, literary evenings, and reading competitions, which were popular with both children and adults. Her enthusiasm and dedication to her work did not go unnoticed. Thea had received several awards for her contributions to the development of education in her district, including the title of Librarian of the Year in 2003. Teresa's family life appeared to be prosperous at first glance. She was married to Richard Lawson, a 50-year-old civil engineer. The couple had 2 children, a 17-year-old son, Jason, and a 14-year-old daughter, Emily. The family lived in a cozy 2-story house on the outskirts of Franklin, where Teresa enjoyed spending time in her small garden, growing flowers and vegetables. The last days before Teresa's disappearance passed without any visible deviations from her usual routine. She continued to work in the school library, preparing for the end of the school year. Colleagues noted that Teresa was busy organizing a summer reading program for students and seemed enthusiastic about this project. On the weekend before her disappearance, Thea attended the local church with her family, where they were active parishioners. Neighbors saw her working in the garden on Sunday afternoon, and in the evening, the family had a barbecue in the backyard. Nothing foreshadowed the tragedy that was about to occur. On the morning of May 15, 2005, Thea Lawson did not show up for work at the school library. This was extremely unusual for her, as she was known for her punctuality and responsibility. Colleagues tried to contact her by phone, but all calls went unanswered. By noon, the concerned school principal contacted Richard Lawson, Teresa's husband. Richard reported that Teresa had left for work as usual in the morning and he didn't know her whereabouts. After this, he immediately contacted the Franklin police to report his wife missing. The police began a search, questioning neighbors and checking possible routes Thea might have taken from home to school. 2 days after her disappearance, on May 17, a shocking discovery was made. A local resident walking his dog in Franklin Park found a woman's body in the bushes near a popular walking trail. The police quickly arrived at the scene and confirmed that the body found belonged to Teresa Lawson. The scene where the body was discovered was a horrifying sight. Teresa's body was partially naked and showed signs of a violent attack. The police immediately cordoned off the area and began a thorough investigation. Forensic experts found signs of a struggle as well as various pieces of evidence, including fragments of clothing and personal belongings of the victim. News of Teresa Lawson's death quickly spread through Franklin, causing shock and grief in the community. The school where Teresa worked declared a period of mourning and canceled classes for several days. Students and colleagues organized an impromptu memorial near the library entrance, bringing flowers, candles, and notes with memories of their beloved librarian. Local residents, shocked by what had happened, began to demand that authorities increase security measures in the park and surrounding areas. Many expressed fear and concern, as such crimes were rare in their quiet town. The Franklin police increased street patrols and urged residents to be vigilant and report any suspicious activities. The investigation into Teresa Lawson's matter began immediately after the discovery of her body. Detectives John Martinez and Sarah Collins were assigned to the case. They began a thorough examination of the crime scene, collecting all possible evidence. Forensic experts found signs of struggle around the body, indicating that Teresa had resisted her attacker. DNA samples, fingerprints, and clothing fibers were collected. Particular attention was drawn to the fact that the victim's body was partially naked, which led investigators to consider the possibility of a sexual motive for the crime. During the inspection of the surrounding area, the police discovered a key piece of evidence, a small metal box hidden under a bush near the crime scene. Inside the box were handwritten notes and strange drawings, the content of which immediately attracted the attention of investigators. The first suspect was Teresa's husband, Richard Lawson. This is standard procedure in murder cases to check the victim's closest relatives. Richard was called in for questioning, where detectives thoroughly interrogated him about the events of the day Thea disappeared and about their family life. Richard claimed that on the day of his wife's disappearance, he was at work, which was confirmed by his colleagues' testimonies. However, the detectives noticed some nervousness in his behavior. The second suspect was Alice Thornton, Teresa's colleague at the school library. Some school staff mentioned a recent conflict between Teresa and Alice related to the distribution of duties in the library. Alice was called in for questioning, where she confirmed the fact of disagreements but categorically denied any involvement in Teresa's disappearance and murder. Detectives Martinez and Collins conducted a thorough analysis of the contents of the metal box. The notes found inside contained strange, sometimes incoherent texts mentioning inner demons and uncontrollable impulses. The drawings depicted scenes of violence and distorted human figures. A handwriting expert brought in to assist the investigation determined that the handwriting in the notes belonged to a man but did not match Richard Lawson's handwriting. The police also examined the financial situation of the Lawson family, their social connections, and the browser history on the home computer. Neighbors, colleagues of Teresa and Richard, as well as school students, were interviewed. Surveillance cameras in the park area and on the route from the Lawson home to the school were carefully checked for any clues. Despite the intensive investigation, no clear evidence pointing to a specific suspect was found. Detectives Martinez and Collins felt they were missing something important, some detail that could clarify this puzzling case. A turning point in the investigation came 2 weeks after the discovery of Teresa Lawson's body. The detectives received an anonymous call from someone claiming to have important information about Richard Lawson's mental state. The caller, later identified as a former colleague of Richard, reported that several years ago, Richard had undergone treatment for bipolar disorder but had stopped taking medication about a year ago. This information prompted investigators to take a closer look at Richard Lawson's mental health. They discovered that in recent months, his behavior at work had become increasingly eccentric. Colleagues noted sharp mood swings and periods of increased activity alternating with deep apathy. Detectives Martinez and Collins decided to conduct a second interrogation of Richard Lawson, this time focusing on his mental state. During the interrogation, Richard initially denied having any mental health problems. However, as the conversation continued, his behavior became increasingly unstable. At some point, Richard unexpectedly made a shocking confession. He stated that on the night of Teresa's disappearance, he had experienced a severe manic episode. He recalled how he had pursued his wife to the park, consumed by paranoid thoughts that she was planning to betray him. In a state of psychosis, he attacked Teresa, which led to her death. Richard recounted details of the crime that could only be known to the killer. He also confessed that the metal box with the notes belonged to him. It was a kind of diary in which he recorded his thoughts during manic episodes. After this confession, Richard Lawson was immediately arrested on charges of murdering his wife. News of Richard's arrest and his confession shocked the Franklin community. Many could not believe that a man they knew as a loving husband and father could commit such a terrible crime. The trial of Richard Lawson began on October 3, 2005, in the Franklin District Court. The courtroom was packed with local residents, journalists, and members of the Lawson family, all coming to hear the details of this shocking case. The prosecution, represented by District Attorney Michael Baker, built its argument on several key points. First, they presented physical evidence linking Richard to the crime scene, including DNA traces and clothing fibers. Second, they focused on Richard's confession made during the interrogation. Prosecutor Baker emphasized the premeditation of the accused actions, pointing out that he had pursued the victim to the park. The prosecution paid special attention to the contents of the metal box found at the crime scene. Psychiatric experts called by the prosecution interpreted Richard's writings as evidence of his unstable mental state and potential danger to others. Richard Lawson's defense was represented by attorney James Morgan, known for his experience in cases involving mental disorders. The defense strategy was based on the claim of Richard's insanity at the time of the crime. Morgan presented the court with his client's medical history, emphasizing the seriousness of his bipolar disorder and the consequences of stopping medication. The defense called a number of witnesses, including the psychiatrist who had treated Richard in the past and experts on bipolar disorder. They argued that at the time of the murder, Richard was in a state of acute manic psychosis and could not control his actions or understand their consequences. Attorney Morgan also emphasized that Richard had voluntarily confessed to the crime and expressed deep remorse. He urged the court to consider the defendant's mental state when passing sentence. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which testimony was heard from numerous witnesses, including members of the Lawson family, colleagues of Teresa and Richard, as well as experts in forensics and psychiatry. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Richard Lawson was found guilty of second-degree murder but with consideration of his mental state. Judge Alan Thompson, taking into account all the circumstances of the case, sentenced Richard to 25 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment in a prison hospital. The announcement of the sentence evoked mixed reactions in the courtroom. Teresa's family expressed satisfaction that justice had been served but also grief over the tragedy that had destroyed their family. Richard, upon hearing the sentence, looked dejected and once again expressed regret for his actions. The murder of Teresa Lawson and the subsequent trial had a profound impact on the Lawson family and the entire Franklin community. Richard and Teresa's children, Jason and Emily, found themselves at the center of the tragedy, having lost their mother and effectively their father. Teresa's sister, Mary Johnson, took custody of them. Psychologists worked with the children, helping them cope with the trauma and adapt to their new life. The family's financial situation significantly worsened. The loss of both breadwinners led to the necessity of selling the family home. The local community organized a fundraiser to support the Lawson children, which helped cover part of the expenses for their education and psychological assistance. The reaction of Franklin society to this tragedy was ambivalent. On one hand, many expressed sympathy for the Lawson family and mourned the loss of Teresa. On the other hand, the incident bred fear and mistrust among residents. People became more wary of their neighbors, especially those who showed signs of unusual behavior. Drew attention to mental health issues and the accessibility of psychiatric care. Local authorities initiated a series of programs to raise awareness about mental disorders and the importance of timely treatment. In addition, mental health classes were introduced in schools, and the psychiatric department at the local hospital was expanded. Teresa's colleagues in the school library organized an annual award in her name for students who showed a special interest in literature and reading. This became a way to honor Teresa's memory and continue her work in promoting education and love for books. In Franklin Park, where Teresa's body was found, a memorial bench with a plaque in her honor was installed. This place became a symbol of remembrance for the tragedy and a reminder of the need for vigilance and care for one another in the community. The Lawson case also influenced the work of local law enforcement. Protocols for responding to missing persons reports and investigating crimes related to domestic violence were revised. The Franklin Police strengthened cooperation with psychiatric services to more effectively identify potentially dangerous situations related to mental disorders. The Lawson case left a deep mark on the history of Franklin, Tennessee. This tragedy revealed a number of serious problems existing in society and forced many to rethink their views on mental health and community safety. First and foremost, this case highlighted the critical importance of timely diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders. Richard Lawson's story showed how dangerous it can be to stop taking necessary medications without doctor supervision. This led to discussions about the need to improve the psychiatric care system, including more accessible mental health services and better monitoring of patients with serious disorders. The case also raised questions about society's role in identifying and supporting people suffering from mental illnesses. Many wondered if the tragedy could have been prevented if those around Richard had paid more attention to changes in his behavior. This led to increased awareness of the signs of mental disorders and the importance of seeking help in a timely manner. The tragedy of the Lawson family highlighted the problems faced by children and relatives of people who have committed serious crimes. The need for psychological support and social adaptation for such families became evident, leading to the creation of special support programs for children whose parents are incarcerated in the legal system. The Lawson case became a precedent for considering cases involving crimes committed by people with mental disorders. It raised questions about the balance between punishment for crime and the need for treatment of mental illness. For law enforcement agencies, this case became a lesson in the importance of thorough investigation and consideration of all factors, including the mental health of suspects. It led to a revision of police work methods and improved cooperation with psychiatric services. In the educational sphere, the tragedy of Teresa Lawson emphasized the importance of the role of school workers in students' lives and the need to be attentive to signs of problems in students' families. This led to the strengthening of support programs for students and their families in schools. The Lawson case also affected the public perception of safety in small towns, reminding people that tragedies can happen even in the most peaceful places and emphasizing the importance of vigilance and care for one another. Overall, this tragic story became a catalyst for many positive changes in society. It led to improvements in the psychiatric care system, increased awareness of mental illnesses, and strengthened measures to support those faced with similar tragedies. The memory of Teresa Lawson continues to live in the hearts of Franklin residents. Her tragic fate serves as a reminder of the value of human life and the importance of caring for one another. The story of the Lawson family remains a warning about how unnoticed or unrecognized mental health problems can lead to devastating consequences.